everyone, this is Oren Kaplan again. I am here with another tutorial from my movie The Hammer, which is about the deaf UFC fighter Matt Hamill, his life and how he grew up, and you should check it out. Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon, iTunes, everywhere. Okay, so let's look at today's shot. In Fix It in Post, we're doing a bunch of shots that something was wrong on set, and we're trying to fix it in the edit with visual effects. So if you see this shot, this is a shot where Matt first gets to the college he went to, RIT, in Rochester, New York. And he goes there, and even though he's deaf and his roommate is deaf, his roommate is blasting music really, really loudly. And when we actually shot it, we weren't allowed to blast music very loudly. So we had a stereo here that you see on the right side, but we couldn't turn it on. So something to just help sell that there was music playing loudly, I thought would be to add these lights that kind of look like audio meters. So today we're going to look at how you would do something like that. Something that's even more common than a shot like that is trying to change the time on a clock. A lot of times you'll shoot a scene at midnight that's supposed to take place at 3 p.m. and the clock will say midnight, so you have to go in there and change it to 3 p.m. if you want people to believe it. So let's look. Here's our original shot. You can see over here to the right there are no lights on the stereo. So this is a pretty easy task. All we have to do is build some lights, track them to that stereo, and we're done. So for our first task, let's track that stereo, right? Let's see, can we track the whole thing in After Effects? We could, but let's go into Mocha, my favorite new piece of software, because it just works so much better than everything else. So we're gonna reveal our footage in the Finder. Here it is. It is a half proxy red file, and we're going to open it in Mocha AE. And Mocha is a tracking software that comes for free with After Effects, and it's awesome. In most times that you open red footage, it will get the pixel aspect ratio wrong. It should be 1, which means that red shoots in square pixels, and we're going to fix it like that. The 5D and 7D also have that same problem. So what we need to do once we've opened up this clip is to find out what our first frame is, 94056. So let's find that frame over here, close to the beginning of the clip when he walks into the room. 940, come on. I'll try typing it, 94056. Oh, it worked. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it depends on how long that number actually is. Now our clip ends at 94110. 94110. We'll set the out point. So what we're doing here is we're setting the in point and out point of the clip in Mocha to match our clip in After Effects. And by clicking on this button over here, we can zoom in to see our timeline, all our frames across the screen here. Now let's look at our stereo. Does Matt's head ever cover it? Well, he covers the part that we're going to add lights to, but he doesn't cover all those buttons. So we're going to find a place where we can see all the buttons clearly. We're going to click on this X-spline tool, and we are just going to draw a mask using the left mouse button. We're going to click there, and then we're going to right-click when we're done. Now, you should be careful not to include this back part of the stereo, because the way Mocha works is it tracks planes. And even though this is a surface, this is not part of that same surface. So we're going to try to stick to this surface. And we're going to click this Track Backwards button. And look at that. It tracks perfectly. We're going to track forward. And I'm going to hit stop right here because I see his head is about to hit this tracker. So I'm just going to move it up a little bit and out of the way, just so Mocha doesn't get confused. I'm going to keep tracking, keep tracking. Now that he's out of the way, I can come back down on it a little bit. And back down over here also. Keep tracking. This is actually a very simple track for Mocha. I mean, almost nothing is moving. We're really basically just tracking the position, maybe a little bit of the rotation, but nothing else really. But I left everything on because I found that it doesn't really hurt. Okay, so we have our stereo tracked, and we're going to export that tracking data. And I'm just going to take it as transform data because it's not rotating, and it's not really it's not rotating away from the camera or anything. I don't think we'll need much more data than what we get from the transform data. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard and go back to After Effects. In After Effects, we need to make a new null layer, and this null layer is actually just going to hold our stereo track data. So we go to the first frame in this timeline and we hit Apple V to paste our data. And you see here it shows up exactly the data from Mocha. Now we get this anchor point data, which we do not need. And so I'm going to turn off that stopwatch and zero it out. And now we see right over here our null object is sticking pretty nicely to that stereo. It seems to be bouncing actually a little bit. Well, I guess that's good. That looks good. Okay, so now let's make these lights. I think they should be pretty easy for us to just make. So I think the best way to do it is to just make them in a new composition, and then we'll bring them in here. So let's make a new composition, and let's call it stereo lights. And it doesn't actually have to be that big, 200 by 600. Okay, and I'll set it to full res. We're going to click OK. So here we have an empty composition, and we want to make something that looks like lights. So let's make a new solid. And let's make it the composition size. Let's color it something that's not black. Yellow. Okay. And here it is. Here are the lights. Now, what we need to do with these lights is we need to draw kind of those little rectangular shapes. So I'm going to use the rectangular tool, the rectangular mask tool. I'm just going to draw a shape right there. So it doesn't even have to, can overlap the edges. Right? So here we go. And let's just click on the mask itself, hit Apple D, Command D, and duplicate it. Okay, so let's duplicate that again. And I'm just using the keyboard to push these duplicates over. Right? Stereo lights. So now we have our lights, but they are all the same color. So let's do a simple trick here, which is we can generate a ramp. It'll do all the coloring for us. For the bottom of the ramp, we want a green color. And for the top of the ramp, we want a red color to indicate that this music is too loud. So let's put the start down here, and let's put the end up here. And we can zoom out. I zoom out by pressing the comma key, and you can kind of see how it works. So here we go. That looks pretty good, right? Now the last thing that I might want to do is I want to animate it to make it bounce. So how are we going to do that? I think that could be pretty easy, and I think what we need to do is draw another mask. Now this mask I'm going to set to intersect. What that means is that anywhere it overlaps another mask, it'll show that mask, but if it doesn't overlap that mask, it's not going to show it. So I'm going to just set a keyframe for this mask shape here, for our intersecting mask. And then I'm going to move it down here and move over a little bit. Set another keyframe. Oh, messed that one up. I'm going to move over here. Another keyframe. Move over here. Set another keyframe. Move over here. Set one more keyframe. We probably don't want to go much lower than that because we have really loud music playing here. Now you see when I go between these keyframes, the transition is too smooth. So what that means is I want it to just jump like so between the keyframes. So what I can do is I can select all these keyframes, right click, and say toggle hold keyframe. So a hold keyframe doesn't actually tween in between the keyframes. So it doesn't interpolate the size of the mask. It just keeps the shape of the mask until it hits the next keyframe, and then it switches. So now we have these keyframes, and I'm going to do something very not scientific, which is I'm just going to copy these keyframes to random locations. And the idea behind this is that I'm going to have all these random values. And we could use a wiggle expression to do something like this, but I don't know. This seems easier and actually significantly more random. So I'm just going to keep going. Let's take some of this keyframe, which we know is the loudest one. Let's randomly insert that in a bunch of different places. And let's see, what else do we have here? So we're playing this. Not bad, but there's a lot of low ones. Let's see what happens if we highlight all of these, hold down the Alt key, and squish them all together. Get it much faster. I think that looks better. I feel like what we have going on in the beginning is pretty good. So let's just copy that. Let's just paste it a few times. So there we go. You got 10 seconds of this. Which I think is fine, right? I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to scale down my lights a little bit. And I don't want them to be too perfect, so I'm going to feather, actually, I'm going to feather all of my lights just by a couple pixels. Maybe I'll set it to 2. Or actually, let's set it to 10. It's a pretty big comp. There we go. That adds a little bit of realism. And while we're at it, maybe we'll do a glow. Let's see if that does much. I think it's kind of cool. We'll grow the radius. There we go, and it just kind of looks like there's some lights going on here. So we've made our stereo lights, and I think they're pretty good, right? Good enough, as we say in the business. So now let's bring those lights into our main composition. Here is the comp. I'm just going to drop it right there, and I'm going to move it and try to place it. So let's find a shot, a clear shot, and let's find a frame that has all our lights in it. Now I'm going to shrink this down and really zoom in here. And since we're just kind of making this up from scratch, it doesn't really matter what we do. I hit the W key to rotate, and V again to go back here. And I'm just going to kind of shove that in there. Maybe I'll rotate it a little bit more. And you know what? Why not have 2 of these going? So I hit Apple D to duplicate that layer. Move this over here. I'm just going to scroll this layer off a little bit so that they're not exactly the same. Let's center them on the stereo. And let's see. I'm going to actually make a new null object to rearrange the lights, light placement, we'll call it. And where is that null object? Right over here. I'm going to place it right in the middle of these lights. And I'm going to parent the lights with this null object. And what this allows me to do is rotate both of the lights together and move them around a little bit if I want to, as a pair. Okay, cool. So we got our stereo lights.
they look like they're way too bright. So I'm going to lower their opacity, both of it, to around, let's see what I can lower it to maybe 60%. Let's try 40%. How does that look? It's starting to look good. They're a little bit saturated for the rest of the shot. Anyway, let's hide our null objects. They're bothering me. And now this light placement null, which is controlling the position of these lights, needs to be parented to our track. And that should make it stick to the stereo. So let's see. Hey, not bad. I think if you look at the color values of the rest of the shot, you'll see that these lights are way too saturated. So I'm just going to put a quick color correction on these. So I'm going to put a hue saturation on this, and I'm going to bring the saturation down by about 50%. Let's see what that does to these lights. Okay, now it's blending a little bit better. Now these lights look a little bit high, but since we made this null object that controls both of them, I can actually lower both of them. And hey, look at that. It seems to work. Okay, now that we have the lights in place, I'm going to do one more thing, which is I want to add some distortion to the speaker, just to help sell the effect that there's loud music playing. So one of the things we're going to need to do to sell that effect is we're going to need to track this speaker. Let's just track that right here in After Effects. So I'm going to right-click on the original footage, choose Track Motion, and I am going to just stick it right here on the tweeter. It's a little bit dark, but I think it should be an easy track. Let's see. Okay, so we tracked this speaker in After Effects, and it was very easy. I just put one tracking marker. All it's giving us is a position track, which is actually all we need to distort the speaker. We're going to make a new null object to receive the data of that distortion, or the data of that track. We're going to call it speaker track. And let's bring it down here, and let's find our tracker. Under our tracker window, we're going to tell it that we want to send this data to the speaker track. Hit apply. Yes, okay to X and Y. And by the way, everything here is brighter because I just added a brighten color correction layer just to help us see the speaker easily. Called it brighten color correction, and it's a temporary layer. I'm going to turn it off when we're done messing around with the speaker. You can see we have a null layer here called the speaker track that is sticking to the speaker rather nicely. And what are we going to do with that? We are going to displace this speaker using the bulge distort. So let's make a new adjustment layer, and let's call it speaker distort. And we are going to use a filter under the distortion filters called bulge. Now the bulge filter, you can give it a center point. You give it a size, like so, and then you give it a bulge height. And this bulge height will bulge things in and out. So it's cool. Now the problem is, even though we have the speaker track, if I parent the distortion to the speaker track, the bulge, as you'll notice, does not follow it. And that's because the adjustment layer, even though the adjustment layer is moving, the bulge isn't actually taking its coordinates from the adjustment layer. It's taking them from the bulge center, which is this parameter. So what we actually have to do here is a little workaround. We have to parent the bulge center to the tracker. And to do that, we hit Alt, we click on the stopwatch of bulge center, and we get this little line. And we also need to go to the speaker track, hit P, and we have the position of the speaker track. So now if I pick whip the position of the speaker track over here, we can look, and in theory, our bulge is sticking to that speaker. Of course, the problem is that's the wrong speaker. We want it to be on the bassier part of the speaker. So what we have to do here is we actually have to add some numbers until we manage to move that bulge to the appropriate place. So let's just start with 100 pixels on the x-axis and 100 pixels on the y-axis. And let's see where that gets us to. Well, it got us lower, but definitely not where we want to be. So let's try 200 pixels on the y-axis. And that's better. So we're closer. Clearly we don't really need to move many pixels on the x-axis, so let's try 10. Even that's way too much. Let's try 0 on the x-axis. That would make sense, right? Let's try 170 on the y-axis. And we're almost there. 150. Let's see. Pretty good. We can actually even move left a little and up some more. So negative 10, 120. Ooh, almost perfect. 130. Is that good enough? No, let's do it better. 136. Okay, our bulge is now centered on the speaker. Look at that. We play through the clip and it is centered. Cool. So the expression helped us do that. Now we want our bulge height to wiggle. So we hold down the Alt, click on the stopwatch of bulge height. Now let's wiggle. Wiggle takes two numbers. The first number is how many times you want to wiggle per second. Let's say 6. So that means every 4 frames or so it'll wiggle. And what's the maximum amount we want to wiggle? Let's say 2, just to see what that looks like. We close the parentheses and we hit play, and look at that. Our speaker is really going rather crazy. And once it's rendered, we can see at regular speed. Okay, that's clearly way too much, but it's a cool effect, especially if you want to do something more stylized. And I think we need to go to 0.7 maybe. Is that too much? Even that's probably too much if we want to sell this as real. Let's try 0.3. Man, it's a cool effect, but too much still. 0.1. There we go. It's very, very subtle. Most of you are probably thinking, why did we even do that if it's so subtle? But in visual effects, like every little thing we do can kind of help sell an effect, and you know, there's a reality here that we're trying to sell. Okay, so one final thing before this effect is done is obviously cleaning up his hair part there. And here we should probably clean it up too, because the distortion is actually bulging his hair a little bit. So to do that, we just need to make a matte for our character Matt. So I'm going to move this to the top. It's a copy of the original layer, which I duplicated it. I'm going to call it Matte Matte. And all we really have to do for Matt's matte is draw, you know, a loose mask around his head. He's very out of focus here, so we're going to have to feather it a lot. But if we hit M, we can create a keyframe for the mask there. Let's go back to the beginning of our clip. Create a mask over here. It doesn't have to be perfect, because there's only one place that really has to be perfect, and that's when his head is overlapping the stereo. So let's just kind of move that close. Okay, right here. Here we want it perfect. So just really gonna finesse this so that it's right. Let's keep going. Move it over here. Rotate it a little. Now for me, working with masks, I like to double click on them a lot and move the entire mask and rotate the entire mask. Different people kind of have different methods. There's the roto brush too, which is an awesome new tool in After Effects, but for really fuzzy edges like this, I find that it doesn't work that well. And it sometimes is just faster for me to do it by hand. So that's it. Let's see. How does that work? Is our matte good here? It's good there. It's a little low here. I'm just walking through this frame by frame. Pretty good. Keep going. It's good. Cool. Now let's feather it a little bit to see how it looks. Even though, to be honest, it doesn't look like it needs to be that feathered. Let's feather it 20 pixels. Okay, I think that works, right? Yeah. Let's zoom out. Let's look at this. Let's turn off our speaker track. And hey, that looks pretty good. I guess my only complaint is that these are moving a little too fast and they're still a little too saturated. So I'm going to move over here. I'm going to lower, instead of lowering the saturation, I'm going to lower the opacity to 30%. The more I can lower the opacity, the better it is, because I'm blending with real pixels from the shot. And here, I'm going to look at my crazy masks. I'm going to highlight all of them, hold down the Alt key, and just stretch them out to the right a little bit. This basically just serves to slow down our animation. So back in our main composition, things look good. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to do for this shot, just to make it look a little bit nicer, is I'm going to add some color correction. New adjustment layer. Let's call it CC. Before we do that, I'm going to delete my temporary color corrector because I want to start from a fresh place, and I'm just going to add some curves. Now this shot, as you can tell, is really dark, so let's brighten it. Let's keep the contrast. Already looks so much better with just that. Do I need to do anything else? I don't know. A cool trick is to raise the blue levels sometimes. A little bit. Maybe I'll raise the blues and the highlights a little bit. Make it slightly less yellow. Let's give it a little bit more red. Give it a little bit of life. And maybe pull a little bit of green out of the highlights to make the walls look less green. And I don't know. Definitely much better than our original shot in terms of color. And I don't know. If you wanted to, you could maybe make that left wall a little darker because it might be pulling the eye a lot. So we'll just do one power window, which is where we define a shape in a shot that we want to color correct differently than everything else. Instead of curves, I'm going to do exposure. That's always kind of fun to lower the brightness of something. We're going to feather out this mask. You know, maybe a couple hundred pixels. Let's see what that does for us. It just kind of takes our eyes off this wall a little bit. Hopefully keeps it a little bit more on these guys. You know, we can even give it a tiny bit of darkness in this corner. We'll feather out that also a lot. And that just kind of centers our eyes a little bit more towards our couple on the bed. Whenever you can throw kind of a power window over a visual effect, that really helps. So you see here I'm kind of throwing it over the stereo as well, and that just kind of helps integrate the entire shot with itself. And the last thing to do here is to animate these masks just a little bit, just so that we kind of detect some movement with the shot, so they're not just staying there still. They're just subtle little pieces that will help not give away that this is a visual effects shot. Okay, so here's our final shot. And it's not Citizen Kane, but I think it works. We've got some nice lights going on here. We've got a little bit of distortion on the speaker. Got some color correction.
So that's it. And if you want to find out what happens in the rest of the scene, you got to watch my movie, The Hammer. It's on DVD everywhere, iTunes, Netflix, whatever you want. So thanks again. Leave me a comment. Subscribe to my channel. Come back. Let me know what kind of stuff you want to see. And I'm going to do shots from other movies in the future as well. So thanks so much for checking this out. And I will see you next time. Bye.